Today, the World Health Organization officially announced that this is a global pandemic.
In the next several days to a week or so, we're going to continue to see things go up. We cannot be discouraged by that because the mitigation is actually working.
The unvaccinated overcrowd our hospitals. I'm moving forward with vaccination requirements wherever I can.
Hi, it's Jonathan Otto and welcome to COVID Secrets. When the world was suddenly faced with this huge pandemic, everyone was struck with fear. Not only was this new virus on a rampage, but doctors and hospitals didn't know how to treat it. Scientists and doctors quickly adapted and started experimenting with treatment protocols based on their knowledge of how the virus works. It became evident that there are existing treatments that have the ability to lower the risk of severe disease, hospitalization, and even death from COVID. Doctors who had a mission to save their patients, like Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Henry Ealy, Dr. Ben Marble, to name a few, began advocating for effective early treatment protocols to be implemented worldwide in order to save thousands of people from the negligence of harmful and ineffective treatment strategies that the hospitals and many doctors continue to use. We now have knowledge on what works thanks to dedicated doctors like these. They have been and are, however, continuously challenged by Big Pharma and the government, who have evidently tried to suppress this knowledge and even ban treatments that have been proven to work. They've worked with the media to lie about these effective treatments and have gone even so far as to revoke doctors' medical licenses and fire them from their jobs for using these early treatments to save their patients. During this episode, we'll be sharing expert advice from doctors who have been pioneers of early effective COVID treatment protocols that have proven over and over to save lives. We'll look at how you can prime your immune system, making it less likely to become run down with COVID, and we'll talk about the treatments that have been vital in the early treatment of COVID. We'll start with Dr. Richard Bartlett, who goes into detail about how Big Pharma and the government have actively used the media to censor early COVID treatments, which have proven to be life-saving, all for their personal financial gain. He talks about their hidden agenda and also sheds light on the exact treatments that doctors have been using to prevent severe and life-threatening symptoms with COVID. We'll then hear from Dr. Pierre Corey and Dr. Paul Marik as we share clips from the COVID second opinion hearing, the Senate hearing. Dr. Corey gives us an emotional testimony about how he's tired of seeing the US health system's failed responses to the pandemic. He goes into detail about how the early treatments that have proven to have the response needed to end the pandemic, and yet they have been censored by the government and health authorities at every turn. Dr. Marik follows by explaining how the main treatment that has been mandated during the pandemic is actually associated with a 3% increase in the death rate, and worse, hospitals were incentivized to use it, while treatments that have actually shown to be effective have been censored. Dr. Richard Bartlett, it's a pleasure to be with you today, and I really appreciate you taking the time to interview with me. I have had some great conversations with you over the last couple of days, and it's been great getting to see your heart and your interest for people's livelihood and the spiritual components as well of what we're facing right now. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. And Dr. Bartlett, I think probably the best place to start would be with your background. Can you tell me a little bit about where you've come from and some of the things that you've done through your career?
Well, I've been an emergency room doctor for the last 30 years. For 7 years, I was an advisor to the governor of Texas, Governor Rick Perry, on the Health Disparities Task Force, and that was a 2-year appointment. At the end of 2 years, he asked, would I please help him another year, and that continued for a total of 7. And at the end of that, because of what we accomplished as a team on the task force with the governor, I received the Meritorious Service Award from Texas Health and Human Services. And so that is pertinent to this pandemic because it was about advice for healthcare on a government level. And also, besides working in the emergency room, I've been medical director of clinics, emergency rooms, hospice, home health, nursing homes. So I've had a diverse career of many different roles.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your service, Dr. Bartlett. What were some of the big takeaways in your career there? Like, you're seeing what's going on with the world right now with the pandemic, or so-called pandemic. And what do you think were some of the warning signs that you had back then? Did you see rumblings of this type of thing happening, or examples of where tyranny and illicit measures could be taken, and blatant protocols or tools that could be used to save lives were being ignored, either for ignorance sake or for the sake of gain? In this case, we know the pharmaceutical companies have certainly gained from our lack of information in regards to early treatment. But what did you see during some of these years that you were working in this fashion?
Well, in the beginning of the pandemic, we were told there's nothing you can do. Just hide, shelter in place, wait for a few government leaders to come up with a vaccine that would be the silver bullet, the final answer. And that was the only solution that was offered to us. As a matter of fact, every person in the United States was told, if you have mild to moderate symptoms from COVID, just stay home and tough it out with Tylenol. And people would come to the emergency room very ill, and if their oxygen level wasn't low enough, they'd be sent back home. In other words, it was late care only that healthcare was offering. Ventilators. When we were told we didn't have enough ventilators, we needed more ventilators to treat COVID, like that was our strategy. And we saw that was a disaster. Initially 90% died that were put on ventilators, and then 80%. And so it's still a high percentage of the patients with COVID that end up on a ventilator that die. And so that's not a winning strategy. And at the beginning of the pandemic, working as an emergency room doctor, I found a strategy that was working, and that was early treatment. And we also could use this medicine, an inhaled steroid called budesonide, to stabilize patients, even help people in late disease. Because with COVID, if they end up in the hospital, they have acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS. And that's a condition that causes you to have low oxygen and inflammation in the lungs. And that's exactly what we're seeing with late disease of COVID. Yet this inhaled steroid is indicated for that. And so we have, when we saw the success we were having and started doing interviews, I did an interview on America Can We Talk with Debbie Georgatos, and that interview went viral, 5 million views in 2 weeks, and YouTube pulled it and said it was dangerous. And that was a shock to me, because I thought everybody would be excited that there was a solution to this problem, because budesonide, this inhaled steroid, is readily available. It's at every pharmacy on every corner in the United States. It's in every town on the planet. It's inexpensive. It costs $3 for the full cash price for the medicine for a treatment. $3. Nobody's going to get rich off of it. It's so safe, it's used on 2-pound premature babies in the NICU for decades, and nobody bats an eye. And that's as delicate a human on the planet that you'll find as a 2-pound premature baby in the NICU. And so we had something safe, inexpensive, readily available, that was effective. And when I started doing interviews, I was suppressed and censored by Instagram Live. My live audio was cut while I was being interviewed by RFK Jr. on his Instagram Live. The YouTube censored and suppressed the message. Facebook, every major institution that is for multimedia at the time was suppressing or putting out misinformation. We had KHU of Houston doing a fact check, putting a big X up there saying it was not accurate information. We had the main newspapers and all the press was putting out information saying this was not factual. And to be icing on the cake, Anthony Fauci interviewed, he recruited Matthew McConaughey, an A-list actor, to get the message out, his message, on the internet in an interview where Matthew asked him, what about budesonide? People think that works against COVID. And Anthony Fauci said to Matthew McConaughey, well, in reality, Matthew, it's just a placebo. It doesn't really work. but he did not offer any science. He just said that without anything to back it up. But months later, Oxford University, the oldest university in the English-speaking world since 1096, with 72 Nobel Prize laureates, did 2 randomized controlled trials, the STOIC trial and the principal trial, studying one medicine, inhaled budesonide, against one disease, COVID, and they stopped the studies early because the evidence was overwhelming. They said it would be unethical to continue the study and give people who have COVID placebos when there's something that could save their life, budesonide that was uncovered during the study. And they concluded, Oxford University concluded, that 90% of hospitalizations and ER visits and even urgent care visits could be prevented with just one medicine used early, budesonide, an inhaled steroid for COVID. And so that was overwhelming evidence, but I've never heard Anthony Fauci print a retraction, correct his misinformation. And when you talk about misinformation that is dangerous, when he said that it was just a placebo and it's out there on the internet, anyone can find that, that is misinformation from someone who's supposed to be leading our fight against this deadly pandemic. I think that's inexcusable. At least he should be fired. At least he should be corrected. When you look at 90%, most people die in the hospital. And if you'll look at the numbers that were reported for deaths from COVID, 90% of hospitalizations could be prevented. And if most people are dying in the hospital, does that mean 90% of the total deaths could have been prevented? I think it's amazing that this type of information is so effectively suppressed. But the good news is it has been used around the world. In Uttar Pradesh, the province in India that was being hit by COVID, and we were being warned that there was a total disaster that was developing there, their health advisors put out information to the doctors in that whole province saying use hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and budesonide. And the numbers just plummeted. It totally crushed the wave of COVID that was developing in that province of 240 million souls. And so we're talking about 2/3 of the United States population in that one province of Uttar Pradesh, and the overwhelming success of early treatment. And so why is that not on the mainstream news? I think we all know why. There's definitely an agenda against early effective treatment, but we have heroes that have arisen during this time, like Governor Ron DeSantis, whose message has been early treatment saves lives. And so everybody that's thinking logically, scientifically, is coming to the same conclusion. Our way out of this is the way out of every disease. We stabilize patients with respiratory viral illnesses. Stabilization. I'm an advanced trauma life support instructor. That's a course that every doctor has to be certified in if they're going to work in the emergency room, at any emergency room. And so I teach doctors how to stabilize patients. And in advanced trauma life support, we teach stabilizing the airway, breathing, circulation, the ABCs of taking care of patients in a crisis. And so with COVID, we all know, every elementary school kid knows that this is a problem with breathing. And so we need to stabilize breathing. Hey, I'm an expert in that. I teach emergency room doctors how to stabilize breathing. And so we have a tool, there are many tools out there that have been proven to be effective, but one of them is inhaled budesonide, which stabilizes the breathing. There's a study at the NIH database, that's the government database, that shows that using nebulized budesonide for patients on the ventilator in the ICU with acute respiratory distress syndrome benefit greatly, that it's an overwhelming success. And they documented in their study that it does 4 benefits. One, it improves the blood oxygen. That's why people are in the hospital. If they didn't need the oxygen, they wouldn't be in the hospital with COVID. Secondly, it stops the release of the cytokines from the source. They drew blood and they showed tumor necrosis factor, and several of the interleukin cytokines went to 0. They plummeted in their levels in the blood. when they were given just an inhaled steroid in the lungs. Very safe, with not a lot of side effects, not a lot of risk, very low risk compared to all the other things that are done in the hospital. It also stopped the remodeling or scarring of the lung tissue, permanent damage. It also reversed the edema or swelling in the lung tissue. All of those are good. If it just did one of those things, that would be wonderful. And it would, but to suppress this information is criminal in my mind. That's my opinion. And so many people have died that should not have died. That's very clear.
I appreciate you sharing that. And before we leave the topic of the inhaled budesonide, you shared with people how they could get it. Some of the things that you were mentioning were, I believe, applying to the U.S. Was there any direction you'd give to people that are living internationally, whether it's Canada, Australia, Europe, anywhere, China, Africa? What would you say as to how people go about these types of things still?
You know, that's an interesting thought, because my focus has been, I'm licensed to practice medicine in Texas and in the United States, and so I'm immersed in taking care of people right in front of me. But it's not a new idea that someone might be licensed in the United States and help people with a medical condition in another country. And so there is telemedicine services available, but budesonide is available in every country on the planet right now. And in many countries, you can get this life-saving medicine without a prescription. Many countries don't require prescriptions for safe medicines like budesonide. And so nebulizer machines in the United States require a prescription right now, but you can order them online and get them without a prescription. And in other countries, people have access to nebulizer machines. And actually, the treatment for COVID with budesonide nebulizer treatments, the Respule, the little plastic container of pre-mixed, pre-measured budesonide, only costs $3 for a treatment. That's very inexpensive. It's almost less expensive to just go ahead and get the more effective treatment, the nebulizer treatment, than to get an inhaler of budesonide. That's almost more expensive, even though it doesn't get the same amount of medicine to the target tissue in the lungs. And so I'm recommending people get a nebulizer machine and have that in their house. They can check with telemedicine services if their provider won't take care of them. If they're able to get on the internet, budesonideworks.com has the providers tab that do telemedicine. And it's not a new idea that American healthcare providers would give care to other countries.
Hi, it's Jonathan, and thank you so much for joining me in this episode. I'm so glad that we can provide this to you, because I know that this is the information that saves lives. We've seen it. I've seen it firsthand. I've had loved ones that have used the information that we had here, people that are close to us, and they're alive and with us today because they have the truth. And these were serious conditions as well, people that had severe cases of COVID that were also having to deal with the dramas of hospitals and them restricting treatments, and us having the resources that we had here with the experts and the information that we've been sharing with you allowed us to learn how to navigate and help our friends navigate certain situations like the one I'm mentioning, and many other challenging circumstances where people over the past year, particularly, we were focusing on people recovering through these protocols. And I'm just so glad that we have these tools. They save lives, and that's what matters. Now, the issue that we all face is that information that is valuable today is being censored more than ever. It's unprecedented how much censorship is going on. And I want you to be able to rise above that and make sure that you have tools that you can use to navigate challenging circumstances. And that's how we can continue to save lives moving forward. And so one of the great things that you can do is to own this series. And by owning this series, you get all the additional content that was a part of this, that was the extended versions, but in order to cut this down so it was able to be viewed during this viewing window, it doesn't contain some of those extended full-length interviews, for example, and 50 full-length interviews are there in the gold package, so you can use and enjoy and watch the entirety, while you can read the transcripts and listen to the audios if you like, while you're driving or whatever you need, and that it's there in your membership area for whenever you want it, and it's censorship free. And also the books and DVDs that are printed and sent out to your home, so you have them there on your coffee table and you can use them. And we're offering an up to 71% off discount only during this window of time, this special viewing of the free screening. And after that, we'll completely shut it down so that people won't be able to access after that this amazing discount and the program itself, as well as all the bonus gifts. And we have just under $1,000 worth of free bonus gifts at this point in time, and we'll stay tuned for any additional gifts that we'll add in, especially for all those that have purchased the program. You guys will get all kinds of additional bonuses that we're adding in. And the big reason for that is that we're helping you navigate the corners that are coming in the future. So we're adding to this body of work to help you. And for example, when you get on a question and answer session, we'll have those made available too, so that you have the ability to participate, ask questions, and get to have that human interaction. So thank you so much for considering this. You can do this simply by just adding this to your order today by clicking the buttons below. You can click a banner or a button there, and that will direct you to the page where you can choose which package you like, the silver or the gold, and whether you'd like to get the printed version. Check it out here while you can and secure all these amazing gifts and discounts. And we appreciate you taking the time to consider. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the episode.
So what do you do if you have symptoms of COVID and then you do a test and it's positive? So now you have a positive test and you have symptoms of COVID. Here's what you do. You act immediately. You do not delay. It's just like if you have a heart attack. In medicine we say time is muscle, heart muscle. We say with a stroke, time is brain matter. And with this disease, it's critical that you get treated early. You do not delay. And so you immediately find out where the Regeneron monoclonal antibody infusion center is. And you can look up emergency centers in a large city and call those emergency centers and ask if they have that. Secondly, you seek out the effective treatment at home, which is budesonide nebulizer treatments, aspirin, and the correct antibiotic. If your regular physician that you have a relationship with will do the right thing and offer that to you, then that's the place to start and stop. Just go with your doctor. But if you don't have a doctor, you have the option of going to budesonideworks.com, a third-party website that I don't own or operate, that has a providers tab that has providers listed from all 50 states and Washington, D.C. So they offer telemedicine. And so you can contact the phone numbers, the emails, and you can seek help there. And they know what to do. They'll make sure you got the budesonide nebulizer treatments, the aspirin, clarithromycin is an antibiotic that I recommend, so that you're covering secondary bacterial pneumonia, you're protecting from clots, which would be a heart attack, stroke, or a pulmonary embolus in the lungs, and you're also treating the root cause of the virus in the lungs, causing the release of the cytokines with the budesonide. So you can go to budesonideworks.com, you can click the providers tab, and then you're connected to someone who can call in the medicines for you, because budesonide is a prescription medicine for the nebulizer machine. Interestingly, budesonide nose spray used to be prescription, but it's over the counter now. It's so safe that it's not even requiring a prescription. So I've told U.S. congressmen and senators that we need to make this over-the-counter medicine, budesonide nose spray, and over-the-counter medicine for the nebulizer to remove one of the most ridiculous obstacles between a patient that's dying, potentially dying, and their life-saving medicine, the doctor. We need to remove that obstacle. With this particular medicine, it's so safe. Aspirin's over-the-counter. Tylenol's over-the-counter, and people die from Tylenol overdoses, unfortunately, every year in the United States, every month in the United States. But budesonide, nobody's died from that. And so we should make this extremely effective tool at preventing hospitalization and death over the counter. But it isn't over the counter today. So you need to find your regular doctor or go to budesonideworks.com and contact one of those providers, and they'll call it all in. You don't have to learn medicine. You just need to connect the dots so you can have someone take care of you and call it into the pharmacy. And, there's another tool that's being discussed. I think everybody's heard of ivermectin. I went to Texas Tech University and Texas Tech Medical School. And Texas Tech El Paso received a $1.7 million grant from the NIH, which is the United States government. And that grant was to study ivermectin, that one medicine, against one disease, COVID, in humans, not horses. And so I think that's an interesting development, and that's actually happening right now.
What do you think will be the outcome of that study?
I think that we're going to find that ivermectin is an effective tool for not only horses, but also for humans, and that it's got its place, and that it's been documented in many, many studies. And I think this will just be a confirmation again that ivermectin is a very effective tool for many diseases, not just parasites.
Wow, and it certainly is an interesting concept. I've often held the position that when you can clear a parasitic infection, you can actually deal with a lot of different issues in the body. So it allows the body to resolve other issues. So and the fact that people have not done parasite cleanse, it used to be so common, where even the song "A Spoonful of Sugar Helps the Medicine Go Down" was about people taking turpentine and putting sugar on it, so it would make the parasitic medicine more palatable. Not advising people to take turpentine, but these were the things that were being used, and the fact that we don't do parasite cleanses anymore, and the fact that what if people dealt with the fact, for example, Toxoplasma gondii is understood to be in 60 million Americans, according to some studies.
I would say that that's probably greatly decreased during this COVID pandemic, because there's a lot of healthy ranchers in the United States right now, because they have been very creative at treating COVID at home. And ivermectin is available at many feed stores. And so I'm saying that that's just a historical fact. So I would say probably the parasite infestation in the United States has greatly plummeted during this pandemic.
That'd be great.
Yeah, but I used, before COVID, it was my pattern to bring free medical clinics to third world countries around the world that were devastated by disasters. And so one of the tools that we would bring is anti-parasite medicines in a pill form. And so that's your parasitic infestations are unfortunately endemic in many populations, and so
including the Western world.
And so we're able to help that. I mean, we're not helpless or hopeless. We have tools that are effective, and so I'm very familiar with treating parasitic infections all around the world. You go to Guatemala, and they may have diabetes, high blood pressure, and other problems, but I would say the overwhelming masses that came for the free medical clinics that we were offering all had abdominal pain and GI symptoms, and you could just know that they also were at extremely high risk of having parasitic disease. And so it was almost necessary to not only get their vital signs and their history, but to just go ahead and treat them empirically for the parasite disease as well, while you're taking care of their other problems. And so it'll be interesting to have the results of the NIH-funded $1.7 million grant funding to Texas Tech El Paso to study ivermectin on humans that have COVID. That study will be completed. We will get that information. I believe it'll confirm what we already know.
I'm really tired of watching the U.S. health system's failed response to this pandemic. I cannot list, and I do not have the time today to talk about the innumerable failed policy responses. Some of them are so obscene, absurd, illogical, and non-scientific that they're almost unspeakable. Things like, if you guys remember, not testing the vaccinated. Things like not recommending vitamin D, not checking vitamin D levels. I mean, things that are so fundamental, basic about science and medicine, and that they've been avoided. And I have to say, I'm gonna call it out, and I'm known for this. I call it like I see it. I'm calling attention to the corruption. If you look at these innumerable failed policies, there's only one way to understand them. They are literally written by pharmaceutical companies. Almost every single policy serves the interest of a pharmaceutical company. However, if you look outside the United States and look around the world, there have been numerous successes. As one of the world experts on ivermectin, let me just talk about some programs which used ivermectin. My colleagues here, as Dr. Risch just pointed out, there are a number of compounds that we've identified that are effective in early treatment. Almost all of them are repurposed or generic. But let me just say a few words about ivermectin and what it's doing around the world. Not in the United States. In the United States, it's a horse dewormer, it's horse paste, and only the illiterate, ignorant, and or unvaccinated use it. But let's talk about some of those successful programs. Number one, across the world, there have been programs by health ministries which employed either widespread distribution or test and treat programs. I'm going to list them for you today. Listen well. That medication has been shown to literally solve the pandemic in numerous regions around the world. Mexico City, December of 2020. Their state health system deployed an early test and treat program. They deployed 250 mobile testing units throughout Mexico City, and they had treatment kits. They used and they collected data on 120,000 people. 50,000 of them took treatment kits, and they found in those who were given treatment kits that up to 75% avoided hospitalization. Up to 75% avoided hospitalization. Their hospitals emptied. Argentina, La Misiones, another health ministry, early test and treat with significant dosing for 5-day strategy. They found that over 4,000 patients, again, 75% reduction in the need for hospitalization and an 88% reduction in death. They were avoiding hospitalization and avoiding dying. The miracle of Uttar Pradesh, which is not covered in any newspaper in almost any country around the world. They literally eradicated COVID from its borders. It's a poor state in northern India, using over 70,000 healthcare workers distributed across the country or their state. They visited 97,000 villages. They tested early. They gave everyone ivermectin in early treatment. They gave household members ivermectin for prevention, and all of the healthcare workers took it. In September of 2021, they reported that in 67 of the 75 districts, there was not one active case. Their positivity rate in the previous 2.5 million tests was 0.007%, which is effectively zero. They eradicated COVID from their borders. This was not covered. This was not covered. 2 newspapers in India covered this, and the word ivermectin was not mentioned. The Brazilian city of Itajaí. This is a paper that was published in the last 2 weeks. It is one of the most remarkable studies in the history of medicine because it included complete data on 160,000 people in the city of Itajaí, where that health ministry in June of 2020 offered its entire citizens, inhabitants, the opportunity to take ivermectin as a preventative. 113,000 people decided to, and something around 50,000 did not. And when you compared the 2 groups, even though the group that elected to take it was sicker, older, more overweight, much more disease, they got the disease 50% less. They went to the hospital 68% less, and they died 70% less often. It is a truly remarkable study using immense amounts of data. La Pampas, Argentina, same thing. Early test and treat program showing that the need for ICU or death fell by 50 and 60%. Peru did mass distributions long ago in 2020 until they stopped doing it because the administration changed. But they showed in all of the regions where they did mass distributions, mortality rates and case counts fell. It is a highly effective medicine. Even in Japan, the president of the Tokyo Medical Association announced to all doctors during a summer surge that they should use ivermectin in the treatment. Within weeks, the hospitalization rates reported out of Japan were lower than at any other time in the pandemic. That medication works. And when you deployed an early test and treat strategy, you can cure and solve this pandemic. That information is being buried. Why is that happening, you might ask? I'm going to say that what I've just reported today, that information is being suppressed across most of the world. United States health agency structures and policies created over the last 50 years have tightly intertwined the pharmaceutical industry with public health institutions, resulting in repeated policies placing pharmaceutical industry interest ahead of the welfare of U.S. citizens. The industry's capture of our health agencies, combined with their increasing financial control of most major media, social media, and medical journals, has led to an ability to widely suppress and or distort any information which supports the efficacy of repurposed, low-cost, off-patent medicines. This war has been going on for decades, and this decades-long war on repurposed drugs waged with the ever-present goal of protecting the market for novel, patented, obscenely profitable, and often barely tested and toxic medications, has reached a pinnacle in COVID-19. It's an absurdity, it's an obscenity, and it's a crime. It has to stop. The impacts of their disinformation war on repurposed medicine now constitute crimes against humanity, given the global morbidity, mortality, and loss of social, societal, and economic liberties that could have been avoided if such information would have been widely disseminated.
Dr. Merrick received his medical degree from the University of Witwatersrand, Johannesburg, South Africa. He is board certified in internal medicine, critical care medicine, neurocritical care, and nutrition science. Dr. Merrick was professor of medicine and chief of pulmonary and critical care medicine, Eastern Virginia Medical School in Norfolk, Virginia. He has written over 500 peer-reviewed journal articles, 80 book chapters, and authored 4 critical care books, and has been cited over 48,000 times in peer-reviewed publications. And Dr. Merrick is certainly one of those doctors who've been persecuted for treating patients. Dr. Merrick.
Thank you, Senator Johnson, and it's a privilege to be here with my esteemed colleagues. So, as you said, I'm a critical care doctor. I've practiced in the ICU for 35 years until recently, until my job was terminated. I've been treating COVID patients in the ICU since March of 2020. I've treated hundreds and hundreds of COVID patients. So what I need to tell you is that between 4 to 10% of symptomatic patients with COVID-19 have required hospitalization across the world. With Omicron, it's about 2%. In this country, 4 million patients have been hospitalized with COVID, and of those, 850,000 poor souls have died. 850,000 people have died. These have been unnecessary, needless deaths. The NIH guidelines for the treatment of hospitalized patients for COVID include remdesivir and low-dose dexamethasone. Consequently, almost every single patient in this country, is treated with the combination of remdesivir and low-dose dexamethasone. The PALM study group investigated 4 drugs for the use of Ebola. The results were published December the 12th, 2019 in the New England Journal of Medicine. And that date is particularly important because that signaled the beginning of COVID. The Data Safety Monitoring Board of that study terminated the study of remdesivir, because remdesivir increased the risks of death and renal failure. It was such a toxic drug, the Data Safety Monitoring Board terminated the use of remdesivir. Yet, in January and February of 2021, the NIH and the Act 1 study enrolled patients in a study looking at remdesivir for the treatment of COVID-19. The last patient was enrolled April 19, 2020. 10 days later, before the study had actually terminated, Dr. Fauci sat in the Oval Office of the White House and he said the trial was good news. What Dr. Fauci did not tell you was that the primary endpoint of the study was changed halfway during the study. We all know that is scientific misconduct. Because the study was not going to be positive, they changed the primary endpoint. The original endpoint was an 8-point ordinal scale that included death and a requirement for mechanical ventilation. Knowing that remdesivir would not affect those endpoints, they invented a bogus endpoint called time to recovery, which they showed in this study was statistically significant. And based on this bogus endpoint, remdesivir was approved by the FDA on October the 20th, 2020. So if one does a meta-analysis looking at the studies of remdesivir, the 2 studies which were sponsored by Gilead show a reduction in mortality. However, if you look at the 4 independent studies, including the large study by the WHO, it shows the opposite effect. Remdesivir increases the risk of death. Let me say that again. Remdesivir increases the risk of death by 3%. It increases your chances of renal failure by 20%. This is a toxic drug. But just to make the situation even more preposterous, the federal government will give hospitals a 20% bonus on the entire hospital bill if they prescribe remdesivir to Medicare patients. The federal government is incentivizing hospitals to prescribe a medication which is toxic. So it should be noted that remdesivir costs about $3,000 a course. Dr. Corey spoke about ivermectin. Ivermectin reduces the risk of death by about 50%. It costs the WHO 2 cents. 2 cents. So as regards dexamethasone, this is the wrong drug in the wrong dose for the wrong duration of time. Yet every clinician in this country will absurdly use this homeopathic dose of dexamethasone. Why? Because the NIH tells them to do this. So what the NIH and other agencies have ignored are multiple FDA-approved drugs. These are FDA-approved drugs. These are not experimental drugs, which are cost-effective and safe and have unequivocally been shown to reduce the death of patients in the ICU and in hospital. For example, there are 25 high-quality. So people complain about the quality of these studies. So if you select out the high-quality randomized controlled trials, they show that ivermectin reduces the risk of death by 26%. This is an extremely safe and cheap drug. In fact, it is one of the safest drugs on this planet. You are more likely to die from taking Tylenol. You are more likely to die from taking Tylenol than ivermectin, yet the FDA calls this a dangerous horse deworming medicine. So we have a whole host, as Dr. Uso and other clinicians have said, there are a whole host of drugs that have been proved highly effective for the treatment of hospitalized patients, including anti-androgen therapy, spironolactone, fluvoxamine, nitazoxamide, melatonin, vitamin C, and I can go on. So the question is, why? Why have cheap, safe, and effective drugs been ignored for the treatment of COVID-19, which could have saved maybe 500,000 lives? And I think Dr. Corey has told us exactly why. Thank you.
Next is Dr. Brian Ardis, who discusses two very powerful early treatments of COVID. One of these being anti-androgen medications that have shown to have a 95% survival rate for COVID-19 infected people. The other being a mineral that many people are deficient in and that has the potential to treat COVID patients and lower the risk of cancer. Following Dr. Ardis is Dr. Vladimir Zelenko, who is a Ukrainian-American family physician who was nominated for the Presidential Medal of Freedom and the Nobel Peace Prize. Dr. Zelenko developed the outpatient COVID treatment that has helped him to achieve a 99% survival for his high-risk patients. In this episode, Dr. Zelenko reveals the two real reasons why people die from COVID. He goes into detail about how his highly effective treatments and methods that have been proven to prevent severe illness from COVID, and how vital early treatment can be for people who are high risk from hospitalization and death. Next is Dr. John Witcher, a general practitioner in rural Mississippi since 1996, founder of MS Against Mandates and former medical director of the ER and hospitalist program at Baptist Yazoo Medical Center. He discloses how the hospital he worked in at Mississippi mandated highly ineffective treatment protocols for COVID patients. He reveals how this protocol was designed to make the vaccine look like the hero. Next up is Dr. Judy Mikovits. She holds a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology and is the maker of the controversial film Plandemic, which aims to expose the truth behind the COVID-19 pandemic. She discusses how dangerous recombinations can occur in vaccines and how vaccines are really synthetic viruses. She also talks about the power of strengthening our immune system naturally. Following Dr. Mikovits is Dr. Brian Ardis, who is a chiropractor, acupuncturist, and medical researcher who has treated over 18,000 patients from around the world. He refers to studies that prove natural immunity is far more effective than any immunity from the vaccine. We'll then conclude our episode with Del Bigtree, host of The Highwire on YouTube and CEO of the Informed Consent Action Network, television producer, film producer, and producer of the film Vaxxed. He talks about how the science is proving that the natural immune system is the most powerful medical device ever created and that it does not need interventions like vaccines.
If you actually go to c19early.com, you'll actually look on that website and actually list every drug being used around the world to treat COVID-19 hospitalized patients. And then they give you this data that actually tells you what's the survival rate, success rate of each of these drug or supplement therapies. At the very top of that list right now, you'll see anti-androgen medications have like a 95% survival rate for COVID-19 infected people. Anti-androgens. Now, androgens, for most people who don't know what that is, that's sex hormones, such as testosterone is the most common androgen hormone we know about. But the therapy drug is called anti-androgen. So what it does is it shuts off your ability to make excess testosterone. And they're seeing massive improvements in COVID-19 sick patients by using these very cheap anti-androgen drugs. Now, I have to convey this to people. Dr. Peter McCullough brought this up to me in an interview I was doing with him in studio on my show, The Dr. Ardis Show. And we were doing it together, and he brings up the fact that there's these studies that are showing that anti-androgen hormones are helping to save many lives with COVID-19. And I said, Peter McCullough, that's phenomenal that they have drugs that actually lower androgen hormones and they're seeing benefit in COVID-19 infected people. And then I looked at him, I said, but Dr. McCullough, do you know that zinc is a natural anti-androgen? And he goes, no, I had no idea. And I said, when I developed in 2019, when I developed over a year, compiled with research and then a clinical trial that we did, I actually came up with what's called the Ardis Acne System. And what I found was research studies galore identify that androgen or hormone excess leads to acne formation. And the number one thing they found from research studies from like 60 years ago till now was that zinc is the most powerful anti-androgen to lower excess testosterone and clear up acne. This was brilliant. Zinc by itself, if you are deficient in it, it actually raises your estrogen hormones and androgen hormones called testosterone. That's what happens. And when those get elevated, oils in your skin get produced. Now we're seeing that there's this connection to anti-androgens and their success with clearing up COVID-19 symptoms. There's a direct connection to androgen hormone excess and COVID-19 inflammatory processes that they're finding with anti-androgen drugs, when the truth is there's one mineral worldwide that if you're deficient in, you'll have excess androgen hormones that complicate anything from acne to cancers. Estrogen and testosterone in excess, those cause cancers. Those have been linked for years. Number one cause for those things, excess androgen hormones because of a lack of zinc. Now we're seeing, if you could just put zinc in these people, zinc stops the replication of viruses. It's also a natural anti-androgen. Helps to lower excess hormones. Isn't that phenomenal? Zinc is brilliant. And so anyway, it was great to teach Peter McCullough that. He's teaching me all kinds of stuff. I don't mind teaching him things that he's unaware of. But anyway, awesome. I just want you to know, zinc is phenomenal, and everybody should be supplementing at least 50 milligrams, if not 100 milligrams every day for the rest of your life.
They're all treated the same way. I have zero worry of the new variants because all you need to do is block the common pathway of RNA replication, which is what zinc does. So I'm basically throwing a monkey wrench in the common denominator pathway of all the variants. So I personally don't care how the variant gets into the cell. All I care about is that the virus doesn't make copies of itself and spread.
Got it. So people use the same treatment protocols as they did. So the ones that we can refer to in your site and frontline COVID critical care is the same ones that people use both for treatment of Omicron or
and
Delta.
Prophylaxis.
And prophylaxis as well.
So you need to understand your risk category, and you need to be smart about either taking prophylaxis or early intervention.
Got it. So prophylaxis is for the high risk.
High or moderate risk.
Yeah. But otherwise?
Otherwise you're safe. You could take it if you want, but it's not, like for example, my children, they all had, 8 children, they all had COVID. I was so happy. You know, remember the chickenpox parties?
Oh yeah.
So same thing here. You know, they got through it with runny noses and easier than the influenza virus. So.
Yeah. So that's the great piece of knowledge. So Omicron, Delta, use the same protocols. As with COVID, you need to assess what risk category you're in. If you're in a higher risk category, you're more likely to do prophylaxis versus just, wait it out. And if it happens, then early treatment. As soon as you've got symptoms, then you would go ahead and take the dosing of those things: zinc, vitamin D, D3K2, D3.
No, I'm just D3.
D3, ivermectin.
Again, depends on your risk category. The problem with ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, they're prescription.
Yeah.
And so it depends, there's 2 reasons people die from COVID. One is the moronic doctor you choose that delays treatment, and 2 is the tyrannical government you live under that blocks access to care.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of over-the-counter options now that replace the mechanism of action of hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, which is delivering zinc into the cell. And those include quercetin, which is a derivative of apple peels. It's a bioflavonoid, or EGCG, which is a green tea extract. They both are very powerful zinc ionophores, proven by peer-reviewed studies on the NIH Cvid.
Amazing. So there are 2 examples. I've heard of bromelain being used from pineapple because it's a proteolytic enzyme breaking down protein, so therefore it's helpful for the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein.
It probably is. My team has treated 7,000 patients without it successfully, so it's. I'm sure there's more than one way to get to the same result.
I'm Dr. John Witcher. I'm a medical doctor. Been a general practitioner in the state of Mississippi since 1996. So I've been working seeing COVID patients from day one. Right, in Yazoo City, Mississippi. That's a rural Mississippi county, and I've been doing that for on my 2nd year of my 3rd-year contract. And so, we've been seeing these patients from day one. COVID is real. We were using hydroxychloroquine early on in the pandemic and had good results. And the pharmacist basically said that could no longer use hydroxychloroquine. So I continued to do that until a memo was sent out to all the doctors throughout the nation, actually, through this company I worked with, to say that we couldn't use it anymore. So at that point, we turned, of course, remdesivir came out, and that was used in our hospital setting. really didn't have a choice. It was on the hospital protocol, and so that was the drug we used. As things unfolded, I started following Dr. Peter McCullough and the FLCCC guys, Dr. Pierre Corey and Dr. Paul Merrick, and I got to a point where I wanted to try the Math Plus protocol on my inpatients. I felt like, there was just too much overwhelming evidence that remdesivir was not the drug to be using for COVID, and ivermectin was a much better drug. And so that's the point where, I got where I took several patients off remdesivir and put them on ivermectin. These were inpatient hospitalized COVID patients, and was terminated that day for doing that. And so, a lot that was said today was talking about letting doctors be doctors, and that's really where I'm at. I feel like the government doctors have taken over medicine, and they're telling doctors, I'm just a rural doctor in Mississippi and a general practitioner, and these doctors today were academic doctors, many of them work in very large institutions, and I wanted to tell and I'm so appreciative of Senator Ron Johnson for what he's doing. And my story to him is that, these protocols that the government's pushing is all hospitals. And I can certainly speak for Mississippi. I can't speak for all states, but I'm probably in one of the smallest hospitals in the United States and one of the smallest in Mississippi. And we were using the same government protocols. The dexamethasone, the 6 milligrams, that is a baby dose of medications. It's not going to work. It's not effective.
Intentionally, sir?
Well, I can't say that. I don't know. I just know they're following the protocol, the government protocol, which is.
But that protocol was. It appears it was designed to make the vaccines the hero. In order to have that hero, you have to have complete, destruction. For that thing to actually appear as a better alternative, because if they were giving like very good medication and good dosaging, the emergency use authorization would no longer be allowed.
And that's very likely. I had gotten to a point. I was given the government doctors benefit of the doubt, but you come to a point where it appears to be there's some alternative motive. Maybe it is money. I'm not really sure. At this point, I think it's really a battle against good and evil. That's the only thing that makes sense to me.
It's truly heartbreaking to know that thousands of lives could have been saved if Big Pharma and the government prioritized the well-being of the human nation rather than censoring highly effective treatments for their financial gain. Dr. Ardis is up next, and he discusses the 3 main treatments that have been key in effectively treating COVID-19. He explains the exact mechanism of these treatments and how they actually work to protect the very parts of the body that the virus is designed to destroy. One of these also prevents the virus from replicating. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Jana Schmidt. She is educated in naturopathic health and is certified in a variety of natural health fields and is a member of America's Frontline Doctors. Dr. Schmidt talks about the treatment protocols that she has used to save lives during the pandemic. She also gives us insight into alternatives that she opted for when Big Pharma and the government blocked these effective early treatments. We'll then gain insight from Dr. Richard Bartlett, who sheds light on the exact early treatments that doctors have been using to prevent severe and life-threatening symptoms with COVID. He discusses the powerful role of antiparasitics and goes into detail about the effectiveness of monoclonal antibodies in the treatment of COVID-19.
When I set out on this mission to try to protect and keep as many people safe as possible from what looks like an evil agenda to harm and maim people with bioweapons of a spike protein on a virus, maybe, but the bioweapon by itself, the drug hospital protocols, and now a vaccine, when you could see what the agenda was, I have more faith in the human body's ability that God created to repair itself and protect itself and reverse itself from disease processes that man creates, more than I have on the detrimental, deadly, poisonous side effects of the drugs the man created. So I have to cling on to some hope that God knew what he was doing when he made this thing, and that he knew that man would try to make it better, thinking he could do it better. And I totally trust that the natural elements that he put on the planet and then put us on this planet, those resources that are here, that he had here from the beginning, which includes all minerals that are in the dirt that we get from our crops. You plant a crop and it draws up minerals. You know what those minerals are? They're metals. What are those metals? Look at the periodic table of elements. You'll see them. Magnesium, selenium, iodine, zinc. Isn't it amazing? Even Dr. Zev Zelenko, I loved hearing this out of this medical doctor. When people asked him about hydroxychloroquine and the brilliance of ivermectin, did you hear what he said the very first thing is? The most significant thing is zinc. Put zinc into the body because cells with zinc in them, when a virus gets in there, viruses cannot replicate in the presence of zinc. Isn't that miraculous? And then he said the brilliance of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine is they are zinc ionophores. They assist in forcing more zinc into your cells so you don't get diseased by the virus. It's phenomenal. So if people are on ivermectin and zinc, they don't see or they're on ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, if somebody's on those two and they don't see the benefits, my very first reaction always is, are you supplementing zinc? Zinc's the only thing that stops the replication of those viruses. Ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine are interesting. These are anti-parasitic drugs.
Yeah, tell me about that. What does that explain to us about the origins of this issue? Is this a parasitic infection that's going around?
Yeah, isn't that great? Logic would say, if you're finding these two drugs that are both anti-parasitic drugs and have been used for decades to kill parasites only, they do, I'll just have to tell you. Can I speak on this for a second? Because I just said they're only used to treat parasites. They do use hydroxychloroquine in a form of something called Plaquenil, a branded drug, trademark drug, non-generic. But Plaquenil is used for rheumatic diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, fibromyalgia. But that's hydroxychloroquine. So they are prescribed for other uses. They call that off-label. You've heard that term, right? But hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin overall are two anti-parasitic drugs. Why are these two drugs so effective at stopping SARS-CoV-1 in 2005, hydroxychloroquine, and why are we seeing it so effective against SARS-CoV-2, which is a virus, supposedly? Antiparasitics and antiviral are not the same. The two substances, viruses and parasites, are not even the same creatures. So how are they working to benefit people with this virus? Do you know what parasites love to eat in the human body? They love to eat red blood cells. They damage red blood cells. A lot of people that deal with chronic parasitic infections complain of fatigue a lot. Guess what one of the first signs or symptoms of SARS-CoV-2 is? Fatigue, breathlessness. Their oxygen levels are going down. Well, if you can actually kill a parasite and stop the parasites from eating red blood cells carry oxygen throughout your body. The only way red blood cells do that is on the outside of red blood cells are these little bitty arm extensions called heme. These heme grab and bind to oxygen and carry it throughout the body. The spike proteins on the SARS-CoV-2 virus damage heme particles on the outside of red blood cells and don't allow oxygen to attach. But guess what hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin do? They actually protect the heme particles on the outside of red blood cells from being damaged from parasites, spike proteins, like on common cold viruses. This is why they benefit the human body so much and help to elevate oxygen saturation numbers, is they protect the heme from being damaged from the bioweapon spike proteins that were created and put on the SARS-CoV-2 virus by Ralph Barrick and others at UNC Chapel Hill. So that's the greatness. Two things that these two drugs do. They force zinc into the cells, and zinc stops viruses from replicating. You know what's amazing? Zinc was put in the dirt by God, and then it gets drawn up into our plants, and then we eat the veggies, and that's where we get our zinc. It's also eaten by the animals that we consume in the form of grass that grows in the plants that all the cattle and sheep and lamb and everything else eats. That's where you get your zinc from.
Yeah.
So,
except for me being vegetarian.
Except for you. But I'm just telling you, you get them from plants. Plants.
Multiple sources.
You got to understand, you're eating plants and you're getting zinc from the plants. Guess what the animals are getting? They're getting zinc from the plants too that they're eating, right? So zinc is brilliant. It's phenomenal. It was put on this earth by God, and we can use it. And hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin have these amazing benefits to keeping zinc in the cells. They also protect the outside of red blood cells from being damaged by the spike proteins of SARS-CoV-2.
Dr. Schmidt, what were the treatments that you're using for patients that was different to what American frontline doctors was doing? What were you doing?
Well, instead of the medications that were blocked, like hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, instead of those medications that were really difficult to get, I was getting more accessible plant versions of those. So quercetin has the same actions as hydroxychloroquine, and it's in a natural plant-based form.
And you can get it in supplement form, or you could eat it, or both.
Right, exactly.
And what are the foods that have quercetin?
Well, citrus, grapefruits, and things like that. And I think you'd have to eat a lot of that to compare to the supplementation, but
onions as well, right?
Right. And on a daily basis, then if you include those things in your diet, you're giving yourself that added boost, immune boost. So the natural version of ivermectin, the plant-based that has the same action, is sweet wormwood or artemisinin, and that has been brilliant. And we've been using this for years. Going to different countries, people that are exposed to different parasites and viruses, so we take that prophylactically. And then, of course, COVID came along and we found that it had the same actions for COVID as well. So for people who were traveling or potentially around a lot of other people and they were in that high-risk group, the high-risk group for COVID is very small, right? Over 70, maybe some other health issues. But definitely for that high-risk group, I'd say, hey, you might want to take something like sweet wormwood once a week if you're going to be out and about. And if people came to me and they were sick, then we would say a daily dose of something like that would be suggested.
Sweet wormwood or
artemisinin, right?
Artemisinin.
Same, it's the same, it's just the more technical term for it. Along with vitamin D. I can't even say enough about vitamin D, and my best source is sunshine. It's easy, it's free, right? You go out, and vitamin D is so important. If you look at our country as a whole, it's about 45 to 65% D deficient. And then that went up with lockdowns, right? Because people are inside and aren't getting sunshine. And I do recommend on occasion supplementation with vitamin D, especially if someone's actively sick and they're not getting outside. But I think my first source is sunshine because it's so easy to metabolize on the skin. One note, I've noticed that people with really low cholesterol can't metabolize D. Even if they're taking it, even if they're getting plenty of sunshine, they don't metabolize it. Their D levels are still low. So I always like to check cholesterol levels to make sure, sounds crazy, but they're high enough that they can actually metabolize D.
Yeah, oh, fantastic. So, because a lot of people are deficient in D3, so to take the supplement is smart, is that right?
Well, I think the sunshine is the best source, and you can get a lot of D from mushrooms, cooked mushrooms. But yes, supplementation, if those two aren't getting enough D in your body, then I would say supplementation is the next step. Of course, vitamin C, we did zinc as well, we suggested zinc. I love elderberry. It stops the replication of viruses in its tracks, especially like the flu virus. So that's generally what I would suggest for flu season. So we did the same thing when COVID came around.
Awesome. Okay, and so let's list those out again. So vitamin C, right. D3, right. Quercetin, yeah. Sweet wormwood, right. Artemisinin.
That's the same thing. Sweet wormwood and artemisinin is the same thing.
Good, thank you. Yeah, okay, got it. And sweet wormwood is different to wormwood?
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, and you believe generally for this particular thing, sweet wormwood is better? Okay. And wormwood is mentioned in the Bible. I guess it doesn't differentiate between sweet or not, but it's in there.
It is.
Revelation, for example. Known as an antiparasitic, hence why it's called wormwood.
Exactly.
Now, why is it that an antiparasitic is going to be good for this issue with the COVID?
Well, it has other actions as well. It's not just an antiparasitic, but it also helps reduce viral load and replication. That's one of its actions too. So does elderberry. I mean, there's numerous oil of oregano, garlic, all these things help. Colloidal silver. There's a huge list of things, and I usually look at where the people are, where they live, what they're already taking, what's in their diet, and then custom their healing protocol or preventative protocol. One thing I found really interesting was dietary iodine. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
So dietary iodine, I always really focused in on for people having thyroid issues. and it helped with thyroid issues. But I spoke to so many doctors. Like, I was on the phone every day speaking to people all over the world when, you know, the whole COVID virus blew up, and we were constantly sharing information. And dietary iodine kept coming up because if your thyroid has plenty of dietary iodine, then the rest of it goes to your mucous membranes, your eyes, your mouth, your nose, and if you breathe in a pathogen and you have enough dietary iodine in those mucous membranes, it kills it on sight. So I was like, okay, everybody, we're, you know, dietary iodine every day. Make sure we're eating enough things like kelp, seaweed, things like that, to make sure our iodine levels were sufficient.
Kelp, seaweed, what else?
Well, I prefer the actual drops of dietary iodine, and just need to make sure you get it from a really good source.
Great. And the sources for that would be, I suppose, I'm trying to think of where, probably it's plant extract, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Plant extracts.
And I know that even fulvic acid has quite a high amount of iodine.
It does, that's wonderful. And it's also good for detoxing, fulvic acid.
Mm. So. Okay, Dr. Schmidt, so dietary iodine, you're saying that there's a side effect, or we just discussed the side benefit?
Side benefit, right, to this. And I discovered this just by happenstance. So now we're taking dietary iodine, my family and I, right, every day, just a little bit. And I noticed that suddenly I read more, I retained more, and there were projects that I had, like, trying to figure out that were all coming together, like boom, 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 just super easy. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. Like, I'm really having a great week, right? And then I spoke to my friends, doctors, scientists that regularly take dietary iodine, and I said, wow, you know, I've really noticed this increase of brain function and cohesiveness and comprehension and understanding. And they said, oh yeah, that's totally normal. That's what you get when you have enough dietary iodine in your body. Like, it really helps brain function. So, and I did a few experiments myself just to see if that was actually the case, and sure enough, it was definitely the case. So definitely a side benefit to having enough dietary iodine in your body.
Amazing. And iodine was one of those things that was the go-to remedy for doctors, right?
Yes, it was. And it was pretty rudimentary, basic, easy to get, inexpensive. And there's a very easy way to find out if your body needs it. So if you get some iodine, and there's, I have one that I have on my website. It's a local source that I trust completely, but also know of Lugol's, which I've heard a lot about, and lots of doctors trust that too. But if you paint a little square of iodine on your skin, like on the inside of your arm, and you wait, and you see how quickly it absorbs. If it absorbs quickly and goes away, right, within a couple hours, your body's craving iodine. If it stays for several days, then you probably have enough. That's a simple, easy way to find out. But I also recommend connecting with someone like a naturopath or someone to tell you exactly how much you should be taking.
Awesome. So basically, you put, about that much on your hand, right, on your arm, and then if it all basically disappears in, a couple of hours. Right. Sometimes people have it disappear in like 30 minutes or something, right? Right. And then you know that you're deficient.
Exactly. And then you can work from there.
But if it just, basically, will people keep it there on their arm for days? Will they just to see?
Well, then it means they're not deficient.
Exactly. So it'll just kind of sit there.
Right, and it'll slowly seep into the skin.
I got it. Because it's dark then, so people are like, right. What do you do with
your
arm?
What's going on? Then you can share.
Exactly. You should do it too.
Yeah, there's so many functions to have iodine in the body. Brain function was just one of them, and then of course protecting us, boosting the immune system, and help with balance in people's weight. That seems to be a big one too. So I continually find wonderful things.
I remember recently speaking with Dr. Ben Carson, who has been a leader who has served the American public on many levels, a brilliant man. He was asking me, how many people do you think have died from COVID that should not have died, doctor? And I told him at least 90%, based on all the evidence that we have. That it should be the rare exception that people die. And so, we talked about Governor DeSantis being a hero on this because he was promoting early effective outpatient treatment. His message has been the same as mine. Early treatment saves lives. And so he actually did a PSA recently that said early treatment saves lives. And he listed the things that are effective in big, bold letters during that 30-second public service announcement. That is the way you get the message out. That's how you save lives. You let people know what the solution is. You don't suppress it. And so the treatments that he promoted in that PSA are inhaled budesonide. That makes sense. Now Oxford University has proven it with 2 randomized controlled trials, and then there's studies at the NIH showing that it's effective. But he also mentioned monoclonal antibodies. And so that also is very effective. 90% success with early treatment with budesonide. But here's another tool, monoclonal antibodies, antibodies made against the virus. And so I'm familiar with that idea, that technique as well, because that's a strategy that's been around, a technology that's been around for 40 years now, making monoclonal antibodies, antibodies to a specific disease. We use that kind of technology in antivenom for rattlesnake bites. I've treated rattlesnake bites in the emergency room. And so we give antivenom. Antivenom is antibodies against the proteins in the venom. And so that's a critical part of treating someone who has been injured with a rattlesnake bite. So it's not a new idea to use monoclonal antibodies. Monoclonal antibodies to COVID have been overwhelmingly effective. In fact, the statistics are now that 81% of death and hospitalization could be prevented with that 30-minute investment in time that it takes to get an infusion of monoclonal antibodies by the brand Regeneron. And so I was involved in setting up and actually taking care of patients in a Regeneron monoclonal antibody infusion center in West Texas. And at the very beginning, 11-hour days, 6 days a week, in the full universal precautions, I was totally immersed in only highly contagious COVID patients on purpose, no matter what the variant is. And we were going through the Delta variant wave. And so that would be ridiculous. That would be crazy to do that unless you knew you had a solution that was worth the risk of putting yourself in harm's way. But I also had recovered from COVID. And that brings us to another point, that if you've recovered from COVID, you have natural immunity, which is effective and durable and long-lasting. And so that's been proven over and over again. And so I knew I had protection, but I also knew it was worth being totally immersed in highly contagious COVID patients to save their lives. 81% decrease in hospitalization and death with a 30-minute investment of time where you get Regeneron monoclonal antibody infusion. And we had people, in 3 weeks, we infused approximately 1,000 patients. That caused all the hospitals in the area to no longer be overwhelmed with COVID patients, no longer on diversion, meaning that if someone had a heart attack or a stroke or was in a car wreck, they would be able to be treated in those hospitals because they were no longer overwhelmed and on diversion. People were having to be sent with a heart attack to another county or another state because the hospitals would not accept them and transfer. Until we opened up the hospitals with these early treatment strategies in West Texas. But now we have normal healthcare again. And so monoclonal antibodies save lives. Regeneron monoclonal antibody. There's different brands, but I know that one is effective. And so I would start IVs on patients and watch them through the whole course because we had to be careful. And people would tell me the same thing over and over again. They didn't know that I had just heard that 10 minutes ago. They would say, my headache I've had for 5 days just stopped. My body aches is gone. The fatigue I had has lifted. I feel so much better during the 30-minute infusion. So that's 81% decrease in risk of hospitalization and death with that. But add 90% effectiveness with budesonide. Add an aspirin to prevent the clotting. Add an antibiotic to protect you from secondary bacterial pneumonia. And you've got an overwhelmingly successful strategy. The oldest I've treated, 95 years old, and she's doing great. She recovered at home quickly with early effective treatment. I've said that if someone receives the infusion, many times I see them crawl in and walk out, as the joke that I say, because they're so much improved during that 30-minute investment of the infusion. And I also say keep it boring. If you get treated early, you're not going to have an exciting story of a near-death experience. You're going to recover quickly. And so we're not helpless, we're not hopeless. There are effective early outpatient treatment strategies that save lives that are inexpensive and readily available.
Next, we'll share clips from the Senate hearing where Dr. Richard Urso shares his experience as a physician during the pandemic and how he, along with his colleagues, analyzed existing treatments that had the potential to prevent the serious symptoms that COVID was causing. This led them to finding out about many highly effective treatments. He talks about how the devastating outcomes of the pandemic could have been avoided if the focus had have been on early treatment strategies that actually work. Dr. Peter McCullough and Dr. Christina Parks are next, as Dr. Parks shares her emotional testimony on how her father died in hospital due to the lack of appropriate care. She talks about how the right treatments make a huge difference and are truly life-saving. Dr. McCullough also mentions that Dr. Parks' story is one of hundreds of thousands. Last but not least, we'll hear from Dr. Ardis as he goes into detail about his disease prevention cocktail that is designed to stop oxidative stress. He explains that the oxidative stress is caused by two main ingredients that are found in the COVID vaccines. He also stresses that natural immunity is far more effective than using vaccines or medications, and that the key is to prime the immune system with the right nutrients.
So it's been a great tragedy this last 2 years, but it really didn't have to be that way. We've really, I would say with my esteemed colleagues here, thank you for all of you have sort of influenced a lot of my thinking. And I think all of us will say that we have this. We know how to treat diseases. So COVID-19, the novel coronavirus, right from the get-go, I spent 9 years in a tissue culture lab doing inflammation scarring, tumor virus work. I really just looked at it, okay, it's a respiratory virus. What do we know about respiratory viruses? We know that respiratory viruses live about 5 to 7 days. So I was, as I looked at this, I thought, well, that's probably going to be true for this virus. We didn't have it cultured yet, but as it turned out, in the first year of culturing the virus, I don't think any live virus was cultured past 8 days. It was usually about 5, 6 days. So that held true. So back in March of 2020, a bunch of my colleagues, we assembled, we started looking at options of what we can do. And it became quite evident after talking to people in Italy and South Korea and elsewhere that it was a respiratory virus that was going to be causing a lot of inflammation. And then one of the unique things that was happening here, this respiratory virus for a coronavirus was causing a lot of blood clotting. So you had respiratory distress, blood clotting, and inflammation. And so as a physician, those are easy conditions to treat. The difficult part was really attacking the virus. And at the time that I first looked, again in March, early March 2020, I found about 8 things that might work based on mechanisms. And so I think these are, like, in a sense, tools in the toolbox that we ought to be trying. So my first patient, I treated with hydroxychloroquine, erythromycin, vitamin D, aspirin, and steroids. And I literally was shocked when I went and talked about it that that people were really coming at me about the steroids, because anybody who treats respiratory syncytial virus and other viruses, the inflammatory phase is typically one of the most important phases. And of course, when Dr. Corey came out and said that, he was attacked mercilessly too. But to anybody who treats disease, it really, to me, I was kind of surprised to get attacked. I was getting attacked by people who really didn't know what they were talking about. So what I'll say is, as people who are listening, it's an inflammatory disease. It's a blood clotting disease. We have lots of medicines for inflammation. Why would you not treat inflammation as an outpatient? We have so many different drugs. Why would you not treat blood clotting? We have who gets admitted to the hospital for blood clotting? Maybe a day or two, and then you go back out. There's lots of things we have. Attacking the virus, you have to do that in the first week. And what has happened? We actually have drugs like remdesivir, which are being applied day 15 and 20. They have no chance of working. It's a one-trick pony. It has to work when the virus is replicating. So at that point, what I tell people is the problem is these drugs are, viruses and cancer cells are unique. They use our own machinery. So if you're not killing the virus, you're killing something. You're killing our mitochondria, you're killing our cells. So these are just strategies that it doesn't take a lot of thinking. As a physician, I literally am shocked to see people using these drugs, 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 weeks later. They can't work. So at the end of the day, I think the message that I kind of want to send is, as Dr. Cole said earlier, the virus isn't killing people. It's in a sense, it's the viral particles creating the inflammation, creating the blood clots, the cars versus the car parts. So it's not dying from the cars, you're dying from the car parts. And we've had this the whole time, and I want to make one more, which I think is an important point. I would tell everybody, you can take any 2 drugs away, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, and still save almost all the lives. And that's the end message. We have so many tools in the toolbox. That's the message I want everybody to hear. We can beat this disease. I'll give you one more caveat. As we went from Delta to Omicron, one of the things that happened, and we all we worked together as a team in a sense, we recognized that Omicron did not employ TMPRSS2 binding. What that means, it's like, in a sense, the virus grabs on the cells and it uses an ACE2 receptor, and it also uses another receptor called TMPRSS2. It's a serine protease. The bottom line is, we realized that a lot of the drugs that we were using for Delta, we didn't need in this new disease. That's called the practice of medicine. We adjust. That's what we do. That's how we've always done it. And that's why an ophthalmologist can figure this out, because I had a big background in clinical medicine. I've treated over my career over 300,000 patients. And I'm going to say that I think what you found here, which I want to answer the last point that Senator Johnson made, is why is an ophthalmologist treating? Because patients were languishing at home. And I've treated over 1,600 patients because patients were languishing at home with no treatment for inflammation, with no treatment for respiratory distress, with no treatment for blood clotting. It's absolutely absurd, and I wasn't going to let it happen. And I think, as you see in this room, all of us feel the same. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Urso. I'm going to break protocol here because I'm in charge. Because there's another question I have. And this is the $64,000 question, and I'll have all of you answer it in some way, shape, or form. Why aren't other doctors using their medical skill? Why aren't they practicing medicine? Listen, I think it's appropriate to practice protocols. I mean, you're developing protocols and you're practicing them, but why haven't more doctors thought outside the box and, again, had the courage and compassion to actually treat patients as opposed to follow the compassionless guideline from NIH, just succinctly?
So, succinctly this, when we first came down in March, we were getting messages to go home. And some of those messages were really strong. They basically said, and this is the start, the fear came into doctors' hearts. They said in Texas, for instance, if you use PPE, that you might be criminally liable for interfering with an Emergency Use Act. And it was pretty scary. A lot of us were like, well, what are we going to do? And we're like, well, I guess I won't wear a mask. But that only continued. It was a coordinated attack creating fear, and doctors felt that. And many doctors are actually working in employed positions, and as time went on, they were told in no uncertain terms, if you use these drugs, you probably will be fired. And nobody had to tell them. They're smart people. You don't have to draw a map.
And I want to see a show of hands in the room. We have roughly 100 people in the room. How many of you in the room yourself have had COVID-19? Okay, it's probably about 70% of this room. How many of you in this room, recognizing there are doctors, there are PhDs, there are attorneys, media experts, other scientists, public citizens, how many of you personally have witnessed censorship, intimidation, or professional reprisal and damage as a result of your advocacy for patients? I want this to be recorded. That is 80% of this room have experienced something negative in their life in trying to promote and help compassionately something positive for patients suffering with a potentially fatal illness. I want to recognize Dr. Christina Parks. and I'm going to ask her to give a few brief comments regarding her experience. Christina Parks is a PhD in cellular molecular biology. She's been widely recognized as a leader scientifically in the African American community. Dr. Parks, I want your comments just very briefly on African Americans and early treatment, your understanding as a scientist.
We need to have vitamin D, right? We need to have vitamin D sufficiency. In fact, we need to have hydroxychloroquine. Not only is it's anti-inflammatory, but it actually modulates many of the predispositions for diabetes and hypertension that African Americans suffer from. So regardless of the fact that it's used as a to prevent viral replication and things like that, it can actually modulate the predispositions. And so why wouldn't you want to give it in order to stabilize things like blood sugar levels and in order to stabilize inflammation?
Very specifically, African Americans have double the mortality of non-African Americans, and the mortalities all happen in the hospital. Are African Americans, are they denied early treatment in the community?
Well, yes, they are. My dad just died. Right? He died Friday. Couldn't get a test, couldn't get monoclonal antibodies. We treated him at home. Unfortunately, we had an oxygen machine that didn't work. So his blood saturation went down to the point where he was incoherent. We called EMS. They said, your problem is your oxygen machine doesn't work. They put oxygen on him. He went to 98% saturation. We moved him to the hospital. He recovered all his cognitive functions. He was doing quite well. But he was no longer getting medications that reduces inflammation. He was no longer getting medications that blocked the histamine response. He was no longer getting the medications that he needed, and he was no longer getting lung steroids. And he just declined and declined and declined until he passed away on Friday. And I say he passed away from lack of appropriate care.
Yeah, thank you.
Did you have no right to insist that your father was treated as a practicing physician?
I'm not a physician. I'm a PhD.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. So, but you had no right as a family member.
No, they said these are our protocols, and this is all we'll do. I mean, we asked for those things specifically. In my father's case, things went fairly quickly. First, they told us we'll send him home tomorrow with oxygen. Then they changed their story. And we asked for particular medications, and they said those weren't part of their protocol. They could not give them to us.
There are chemicals inside Pfizer and Moderna's shots. In Pfizer and Moderna, it's called polyethylene glycol 2000. Inside of the Johnson & Johnson shot, it's called polysorbate 80. These two chemicals are known to cause damage to organs and cells in your body through a process called oxidative stress. So now you have mRNA particles that are inside the shots. You have transgenes inside the shots. You have chemicals inside the shots. You have a virus that's been unleashed on the planet. And then you have a spike protein unleashed on the planet, all of which cause diseases with a process called oxidative stress. The only way you stop oxidative stress is you put antioxidants into your body that protect every cell from oxidative damage. So there are 4 main ingredients I put together in what's called a disease prevention cocktail. Why? Because they are proven and research proven to be effective to protect every cell in your body from anything, including spike proteins on coronaviruses, which are cold viruses. These nutrients are proven to protect every cell from oxidative stress of viruses, bacteria, poisons, alcohol, ionized radiation. And all those things are dangerous to the human body to cause diseases. So all I did was compile a list of research studies of the most research proven, most effective antioxidants that protect cells from being damaged from spike proteins, viruses, poisons, ionized radiation. Those 4 things are these: vitamin C, the dosage is 5,000 milligrams, and there's 2 versions everyone should consider: either straight ascorbic acid or what's called sodium ascorbate. Those are the 2 forms of vitamin C that are the best, I think. So use those. 5,000 milligrams a day at minimum. I recommend anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000. If you start at 5,000 milligrams a day, do that every day for a week, and then increase by 1,000 milligrams every day for another week. So you go like this: 5,000 milligrams for a week, increase it to 6,000 for a week every day, then go up to 7,000 for a week. And you want to go to what's called bowel tolerance. 90% of our immune system lives in your gut lining. So as you put vitamin C in, the immune system's going to know if there's a virus or a bacteria in your body it's trying to defend and needs to protect against oxidative stress. The gut knows how much vitamin C it needs. How do you figure that out? You keep putting more in until you get diarrhea. When you get diarrhea, the gut knows, I don't need this much vitamin C, so it spits out the remaining. Then you go back to the dose that was not causing diarrhea, and you stay there. So if you've got 5,000 milligrams for a week, and then you go up to 6,000 for a week, no diarrhea, and you get to 7,000 milligrams, and you start having diarrhea, go back to the 6,000 and just stay there. That's how much your body needs of vitamin C every day. So vitamin C is critical, and that's number 1 on my list. Number 2 is magnesium at 500 milligrams. If I was to get a message across to the entire world of how to reduce diseases in this entire world, and I'm talking all diseases, cancers, heart disease, gut issues, even as simple as indigestion and heartburn, if there was one thing, insomnia, that everyone on the planet should do every day for the rest of their life, if you want to remove the pharmaceutical drug burden on all Americans, simply supplement magnesium every day at 500 milligrams minimum. If you want to be really great, the human body, it's already been determined from the 1920s and 30s. There's an actual formula to determine how much magnesium you should eat every day. It's actually 10.6 milligrams for every 2.2 pounds you are, which 2.2 pounds is a kilogram. So if you want to ensure to reduce risk for all diseases, you want to be taking your weight divided by 2.2 pounds and multiply that times 10.6 milligrams. And that's exactly how much magnesium you should be taking every day for the rest of your life. That will protect you from developing heart disease. For the majority of all people who have ever developed acute coronary syndrome, tachycardia, high blood pressure, congestive heart failure of any kind, magnesium's your guy. It also is an incredible antioxidant to protect against all diseases, especially those from viruses, spike proteins, and poisons. So you have vitamin C at 5,000 milligrams minimum, magnesium 500 milligrams minimum, selenium at 200 micrograms. You have heard a lot of people, there's these great infusion centers that will go mobile and go to your home and do what's called intravenous glutathione, where they inject it right in your veins. Glutathione is proven to stop all the processes of spike proteins and viruses from causing disease. Glutathione is a hugely successfully researched antioxidant that coats the outside of all cells and protects you from damages from viruses and spike proteins, even from SARS-CoV-2. Glutathione is made in your liver. Your liver produces all your glutathione, and you need selenium in order to make glutathione in your liver. So this is why I tell everyone to supplement selenium at 200 micrograms. Selenium supports the production of glutathione. My favorite thing, though, that selenium does, selenium is actually required to make all white blood cells from your bone marrow. And as the bone marrow releases white blood cells, these are called our antibodies. This is our natural immunity. So if you can put 200 micrograms mcg of selenium into the body every day, you'll produce more white blood cells that your body can direct as defense against all bacteria, viruses, and cancer cells. And then this incredible organ right behind your sternum called the thymus takes all those white blood cells your bone marrow is making and circulating into your blood, and your thymus is actually getting signals from the rest of your immune system that there's either a bacteria present, virus present, parasite, fungus, cancer cells, some parts of your body. And when the thymus actually knows that information, it tells your white blood cells what kind of anti-defensive immune cells to become. So the thymus tells them to either become antibacterial cells, antiviral cells, or anti-cancer cells, based on what it knows is in the body. The term T cell stands for thymus cell. That's what the thymus does with your white blood cells. It's phenomenal. These T cells are also what protect you from all coronaviruses, spike proteins, poisons, it doesn't matter. That's the greatness of selenium. The concern about the chemicals inside of these shots are why I included the fourth ingredient, which is called apopectin powder. And apopectin powder was used at Chernobyl and at the Fukushima nuclear power plant leak in Japan. It's incredible, the research studies I found there. The scientists at Fukushima in Japan, they found soon after the power plant leak that started in like 2011, what they found was all children, teenagers, and adults started to experience goiters and cancerous nodules in the thyroid of almost every age group of children and adults. And what they wanted to do was see if they could get the ionized radiation out of the body that was causing thyroid cancer in all these kids and adults. And there was only one thing they found that was effective. And they found it from scientists' documents of what they used at Chernobyl in Russia to actually do the same thing decades earlier. And that one substance was apopectin powder at 700 milligrams. They found you could remove poisons like ionized radiation from the human body. You could remove 40% of all ionized radiation in just 4 weeks, which means if you use 700 milligrams of apopectin twice a day, every day, within a 2.5 month period, you could remove all the dangerous amounts of ionized radiation in the body to protect against cancer. Well, if apopectin powder derived from apples is effective enough to bind to and detox out of your human body ionized radiation that we know can be dangerous and cause cancers in the human body, how in the world could we not trust it to bind to things like polyethylene glycol and polysorbate 80 that are in these shots? These aren't ionized radiation. These are just poisonous chemicals. So I included apopectin powder at 700 milligrams. I'm going to trust the old adage. When we were kids, we used to hear all the time during cartoon Saturdays. An apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, the truth behind that is food actually keeps you healthy and you don't get sick and you don't need a doctor. That's the whole premise. I'm amazed that after like 30 years now, I haven't heard that phrase once. I haven't seen it once in a school or elementary school, and I got 5 kids that have gone through all of them. I haven't seen it for 30 years, this notion that food keeps you healthy, keeps you away from the doctor. No, what do you hear now? You don't hear an apple a day keeps the doctor away. What do you hear now?
A vaccine.
You need a vaccine every 6 months to keep the virus away or disease away. That's what you hear. This idea that you need drugs of any kind, either injected or oral, goes against everything that we know about nature. Nature's never needed drugs, ever. In fact, your body doesn't need drugs now at all. The drugs actually can target a pathogen, like a virus or bacteria that's in your body, but if that virus or bacteria has caused a disease state, once you eliminate the infection from the body using medications, like antibiotics, which are miraculous at clearing up bacteria, once those drugs kill the bug, you come off the drugs. So no matter what disease state you have left, inflamed lungs, inflamed bowels from these bacteria, your natural immune system repairs all that tissue. It replaces the diseased cells every day, your body does. Tears down diseased and toxic cells and replaces it with new healthy ones. It's this miraculous mechanism that God put into this human body. So trust what the human body does. The drugs do not do the healing. Drugs don't heal. Drugs stop processes from occurring. Just saying.
Wow. Amazing. So apopectin.
Apopectin powder.
I've heard of citrus pectin as well. Did people use that for detox?
I did not include that in my actual protocol because apopectin was the one specifically found. I remember people asked me that actually, like, is citrus pectin just as good as apopectin? And this is my response. Are apple citrus fruits? And they go like this, oh man, never mind, sorry. They are definitely not the same. I'm using what they found, these scientists, which I wasn't doing that work in Russia or in Japan for decades. These guys were. And what they found was the most effective was apopectin powder.
Yeah, very interesting.
So I trust that the most.
The thought of getting COVID is daunting for most of us, especially when we have friends and family who have been victims of medical negligence after becoming severely ill with COVID. Our experts have shed some much needed light on the reality that with these proven treatment protocols and immune strengthening strategies, there is no real reason to live in fear of COVID. Knowing this gives people the power to overcome the fear that has driven the pandemic, to protect themselves from the lies of Big Pharma and the government, and to demand the correct early treatment strategies that have saved and that will continue to save lives. During this episode, we have gained incredible insight from our experts into the role that early treatment strategies play in preventing and healing the body from COVID, without the need for invasive strategies like vaccines. The government and medical authorities have done everything in their power to censor these treatments, but we're thankful for the experts like the ones you've heard from today who are passionate about putting their patients first. Having this knowledge ultimately gives you the power to demand the right treatments and avoid the strategies that cause nothing but harm. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode. I enjoyed creating this for you because it gives you the trust that your body can do what it's supposed to do. You can fight off viruses, pathogens, infections. using your natural God-given immunity. That's the truth, that's the secret, that's the power. And once we fully trust in our bodies and we harness and unlock our body's healing power through putting the right things into our body, as well as taking things out, taking toxins out, by this process we can be successful and we can overcome even the harshest and hardest challenges that come our way. We all are at risk of other diseases outside of COVID, like cancer, like autoimmune disease. So knowing the truth about how to treat our bodies right is important, not just for one disease, but many diseases. Now, one of the great things that you can do is own this series. Speaking on that subject, we have extended interviews with experts specifically talking about all different kinds of areas of health: cancer, autoimmune disease, natural therapies for how to increase energy and to combat the accelerated signs of aging, to lose weight. All of these are key tools that are important when it comes to COVID, so I thought to include it and have experts speak on these subjects in our extended interviews so that you can navigate and have great, abundant health. I don't want you to just be an information source. I want you to be a powerhouse of health and vibrancy and energy and life. And from that place, the knowledge that you have then is so powerful as you're able to encourage others with the things that you know, as well as the health that you can afford, right? So the health that we have is what creates the ability for us to do all the things that we do. So I encourage you to take action on this program to invest in your health and in your future by clicking the button or the banner below. You can do that right now and secure this amazing program. We've really jam-packed this filled with amazing gifts to help you and support you in your journey, and I'm so glad that we have the opportunity to offer this to you. And all you have to do is simply take action during this series to get all the gifts and discounts, and do it while you can. If this is something that connects with you, it feels right, and it's something you want to do, make sure to do it now so you don't forget about it later and miss out. So thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.